You would find 1 Timothy chapter 6. We've been working our way through this book and come to a passage that is probably one of the most quoted passages from the Scriptures, and interestingly enough, also one of the most misquoted passages in all of the Bible. The phrase does often get stated that the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, lots of people quote it as the money is the root of all evil, but it is the love of money, and maybe a better qualification is the root of all kinds of evil. But today we are going to talk about this passage as we kind of come to this closing to the book of 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, "Now there is great gain in godliness with contentment." Now before we go any farther, we need to stop. First of all, one of the themes of the letter that Paul writes to Timothy is this concept of godliness. It is a way of living. It means that you know Jesus, but you are also trying to follow Jesus. There is an obedience commitment that He really is your Lord, and you are trying to do it. In fact, the qualifications for a pastor basically says he ought to be a godly man, and there are things that suggest what godliness looks like. If you're going to be a deacon, here's what godliness looks like. And he addresses the issue of godliness for older adults and godliness for younger adults. And he's just doing that all in all, but as he gets into chapter 6, he begins to address an issue. And it has to do with the fact that in the body of Christ, there are people searching for godliness, trying to obey God, who are not all at the same level economically. In the beginning of chapter 6, he talks about the fact that in the church there are godly Christians who are masters. They not only have a lot of stuff, they own people, at least in that day, and we understand that. But then it also says that in the church, there are some of them who own nothing. In fact, they're slaves. So you have people here economically, you have people here economically. They're all godly, they're all trying to please God. And that sort of begins an issue that he raises because there was evidently a teaching going on in the church 2,000 years ago that if you were godly, you would eventually get rich. That godliness was a means to gain materially. In fact, the very phrase just before chapter 6, verse 6, has to do with there are those who are teaching and they imagine that godliness brings gain. Now, if you're not aware, there is even that same thought being taught today in churches. Sometimes there's even a phrase for it. It's called the health and wealth gospel, or the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And the idea is, if you become a Christian and you're just godly enough, if you just have enough faith, and if you just pray enough, you'll never get sick, you'll never have any tragedies, and you will get rich eventually. And by the way, for some of them, and there are names that we'd throw out, and you'd know those names, for some of them, you really have a better chance of getting rich if you send money to their ministry. But there is this teaching that somehow, if you are godly enough, you'll never have any problems and you will get rich. Well, there's some problems with that. One is, I don't think that's biblically what the Bible teaches. Now, the truth is that if you choose to be godly, God very often will bless you. He will bless you with many different kinds of things. And frankly, material blessings are certainly fine, and God does bless Christians in that way. But I will tell you, there's a lot of blessings that are far greater than anything you can buy with dollars and cents. But you also understand that there are Christians in parts of the world where poverty is everything that they are, and richness is not necessarily something to be gained. So there's this teaching going on. And that's what occasions this passage that we're going to look at. And he's going to address Christians, godly Christians, and how they should think about money. And so instead of saying godliness brings you great gain, he says now, or some versions will say, but there is great gain in godliness with contentment. That the ultimate gain of godliness is that you become content wherever you are financially. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. As for the rich in this present age, this is verse 17. We kind of skip ahead. He makes a personal statement to Timothy about that's not the kind of man you're going to be if you're going to be a pastor. But he says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, ready to share, and thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. We need to say maybe just a little bit about what it means to be rich. How many of you are rich? Don't raise your hand yet. The definition of rich for most of us, somebody who's got more than I've got. I mean, that's the way we look about rich. And Max, remember where you are. Person who makes $20,000 a year, man, if I had $30,000, I'd be rich. Make 30, man, if I had 50,000, I'd be rich. 100,000, listen, I'm not rich. Somebody's got 200, or, $1 million. Well, that's not rich. It's those people who got 5 million. And I'm sure there's somebody saying, yeah, I've got $1 billion, but I know people who got multiple billions of dollars. The bottom line is, for most of us, our mindset is that rich is always somebody who's got more than I've got. But biblically, the definition of this rich business, well, pretty much it says, do you have enough to eat and do you have clothes to wear? He said, now, if that's the main line. So poverty is you don't have enough to eat and you don't have enough to wear. So let me just go ahead. How many of you got more clothes in your closet than you really could wear in a lifetime? Don't raise your hand. How many of you have at least once this week eaten more than you needed to eat because you had it? It was there and you ate more. Don't raise your hand. But the reality is, if you've got any kind of abundance, if you've got a house nicer than somebody else, if you've got enough to eat, if you've got clothes to wear, if you compare yourself not with that one or few people above you, but with the rest of the world, the truth is there's probably not a person in this room who does not have substantially more than the rest of the people in the world. So I will ask you the question, how many of you are probably rich? Yeah, you probably all ought to have your hands up. But there's a warning that if God has blessed you, if you do have an abundance, if you have enough to be comfortable, if you are able to eat and you have clothes to wear and you have a place to stay, if you have that and you have it in abundance, there is a warning that you are open to certain kinds of temptation. In fact, there is the danger of being caught up in a multitude of evils. In other words, the abundance that you and I have can do an awful lot of things inappropriate. And so what he talks about is, wherever you are on that scale, if you're going to be a godly Christian, you need to come to grips with the place of money in your life and how to use it and how to address it. The truth is, money is not evil. It's how you and I feel about money. It's how we use it. Money is just a tool. It's something that has no specific morality one way or the other. But it really comes down to what you and I do. And probably of all of the places in the world, it is in American Christianity that we struggle with it the most. And the whole idea of saying godliness with contentment is what the goal is, suggests that you can be a godly Christian in almost every respect. Know Jesus, following Him, trying to do what's right, got most of my spiritual stuff, I've been checking off the marks, and still struggle with this issue of contentment and material possessions. So today, I want to give you a list of some things that I think come out of this passage about how you and I, trying to be godly, can deal and think and must respond to material possessions. So number one, if you want to guard against the love of money, if you want to guard against the evils that come from an inappropriate attitude about money, number one, work hard. In other words, the way you get stuff has an awful lot to do with how you feel with it. You ought to work hard. It is interesting that Paul does say to Timothy that he is to be a workman. So pastors are supposed to work. The deal, I guess. Yeah, we're supposed to work. It's our job. And we're supposed to work hard, and I think that God created us to work. You remember there's Paul who says, those that don't work don't eat, and he talks a great deal about work. And although the Bible also warns us about being a workaholic, that God tells us we need to rest periodically and honor Him, but we need to work. And here's the principle, that working for what you get changes the way you feel about it, and the opposite of that is stealing it. That if you go to work and you put in your time and you take the check, but you didn't really earn it, you've stolen it. If you take it for some other reason, then you've stolen it. The bottom line is, if you work for it, that will begin as a baseline to take care and deal with possessions. And the truth is, people who work harder typically to have more money, don't they? Now, there are lots of aberrations, and I understand that, but as a general rule, work for what you get, and it will help you to have an appropriate value and an appreciation for what you do have. So first of all, work for it. Secondly, be thankful for what you've got. I mean, that's just a good thing, and there's a variety of reasons why being thankful does. First of all, thankful for what you have means that you are focusing on what you have as opposed to what you don't have. We live in a world where there are advertisements around us every moment of every day. You turn on the television, you turn on your internet, you open it up, you see commercials, everybody. And basically the principle is, if you don't have what they're advertising, you're probably not happy. You can't be happy if you don't have a new car. If you don't have designer clothes, if you're not living this kind of lifestyle, and every movie and every television program paints a picture of what life is like, and it always involves money, and that's constantly somewhere we need to begin, not worrying so much about what we don't have, but being thankful for what we do have. I have some granddaughters here today. Good job, girls. Yeah. Got 4 of them here today. They've been in my house, and so the girls have been praying for meals. And that's an excitement all by itself. They pray for pretty good stuff. Our oldest daughter, Beth, and this will always be my favorite prayer time, was praying when she was about that age, and she opened her eyes, which is the cardinal sin, but I only knew it was open because I opened my eyes. And she had her hands folded, and she opened her hands, and she looked down at the table, and as she was thanking God, she thanked God for everything on the table. Knives and forks and the plate and the corn, and I don't know what else. She thanked for every single thing on the table. And I just said to you that if you're not going to deal with material possessions, partly you got to open your eyes and count really what you've got to be thankful for. And look at those things and look at the material things, and then make sure you look at all of the other blessings. The family, the abilities, the opportunities, the privileges, everything. You got to look, and being thankful for what you have helps you to not dwell on what you don't have, and is a guard against those evils of the love of money. The other part is that when I am genuinely thankful, that's the guard against pride. He says to the rich, don't be haughty. Don't become prideful. Don't look it down at other people who don't have you have. And part of that is if I begin by saying, I know that where my blessings have come from are from God. That keeps me in a perspective. I understand you went and worked and you got the paycheck, but God gave you the ability, the mind, the health, the back, the opportunities, that this biblical principle that everything that you and I have that's worth having has come down from the Father of lights, and thankfulness, thanksgiving as a part of our Christian attitude helps us to have an appropriate view of material possessions. So you need to work hard, you need to be thankful, you need to think eternally. And by that he says, you lay up treasures in heaven. You came into the world, didn't have anything. You leave this world, you're not going to have anything. I've done 600 or so funerals. I've done a lot of funerals. Not a single U-Haul behind any of the hearses. None of them. They're always, the bumper sticker that says, he who dies with the most toys wins. There's another one that says, he who dies with the most toys is still dead. And the bottom line is, it doesn't matter what you amass. It doesn't matter what your 401k looks like, your IRA. It doesn't matter what your estate. We had a friend, a church member in Missouri, who loved to go to auctions. And she had tons of stuff. They built a 40 by 40 shed out in the back just to store the stuff she bought at auctions. And I asked her one day about it, and she said, well, I've been to some really lousy estate sales, and I want my estate sale to be the best one that anybody ever came to. And it was like 4 days in estate. I mean, it was big. It was a big deal. But you understand, all the stuff you amass, you don't get to take it with you. And the reality is that most of us will have from 20 to 80 to amass a certain amount of security. And yes, it's right to save and plan for retirement, and it's right to make good choices, and it's right to do good things. But at some point, you will spend an amount of your life earning, and then you realize that those 30 or 40 or 50 years are nothing compared to eternity. And that's why Jesus says to lay up treasures in heaven where they don't corrode and where they're yours forever, and they have some significant meaning. So got to think bigger than this world, and sometimes we get so caught up in this world and security and those kinds of things. So work hard, be thankful, think eternally, give generously. And here's the idea. The difference of love of money and greed. Greed is about reaching out and grasping and pulling it to yourself. Giving generously is about reaching out and letting go. And do you understand that those are exactly the opposite? And the way we guard against greed, the way we guard against the love of money, is to learn to give generously. And so he makes that statement very clearly to the rich. And he says, you got to learn to give. In fact, I am convinced the biggest reason why the concept of tithing is suggested is, first of all, to remind us that everything we have came from God and ultimately belongs to God. And I best remember that when I take the first portion of it and I give it back to God, so that then when I start to deal with the other 90%, I realize how thankful I am and how I ought to be generous. So being generous, giving, to be able to let go of, it makes all of the difference in how you feel about money. It's always there together. So we're to work hard. We're to be thankful, think eternally, give generously. We're to trust God. And maybe that may be the most serious thing about the love of money, because he discusses the fact that they, the rich, trust in their wealth. Are you trusting in your 401k? Do you get online every day to see whether it's gone up or gone down? Check the stock market. Is it good? Is it bad? Do I have enough? Am I going to do that? I know that I've shared with my dad's 95. He's living in assisted living. He knows what month he's running out of money. He knows when it's going to all be gone. He's got it figured out. It's about 2 years from now. And he knows that at that point, what it costs him to live is eventually, and you know, I told my brother that, well, I'll kick in a little bit, you kick in some, and we're going to take care of it. And he says, I've been paying the government for years. They can take care of him. I don't know how that's all going to play out, but he just finally just says, but God has taken care of me for 95 years. I think he'll take care of me for the rest. Trusting God. And that becomes the final thing, that I don't trust in those things. I trust God. Now, I'm going to make good choices. And good, by the way, Dave Ramsey's starting in about a month. You can start working on that and how to make good choices and good decisions. But in the end, it's trusting God. And the interesting part is when Paul began to deal with this issue of contentment. How do I get to where I'm just content and I don't worry about money and I don't worry about finances? How do I reach that point of contentment? He wrote to the Philippians and he said, I've learned the secret of being content. I know how to have a bunch, have a lot, have an abundance, and I know how to have almost nothing. The secret that I've learned is that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that's the ultimate secret, to trust God with what we have. So I protect myself from the evils of the love of money. And I put myself in a position where I really can learn to be content with my finances by working hard, being thankful, thinking eternally, giving generously, trusting God, and then finally, if I've done all of those things, enjoy God's blessings. Money is not evil. And the things that money buys are not necessarily evil, and you ought to be able to enjoy them. And there is a picture of enjoying the blessings of God and not anything wrong with it. And if you want to, after you've been generous and you've honored God and you've thanked God and you've gotten all of those things right, then by all means go out and eat. Buy a better car. Some of you need to dress a little better anyway. No, you don't either. None of that. Take care of go see the doctor. Do the things you need to do. But whatever it is, enjoy the blessings of God and don't feel guilty. Because if God has blessed you and you've genuinely been grateful, then you ought to enjoy those things. And that's a biblical concept. It's a biblical idea. The picture of the man who has been faithful to God, the righteous man who now sits under his own olive tree, sits in his own grape arbor and enjoys the blessings of God. And the contentment gets to the point where because I have the right view of all of the material possessions and all of life, then I really can truthfully enjoy His blessings. This passage comes with a lot of interesting promises. God is going to provide for us. We know that. And it also comes with a warning that for some reason, possessions get us. There's just some danger. There's temptations. There's evils that you and I can fall into. But I hope we reach the place where we really can say, God, I thank you for the ability to work, and God, I'm going to go to work. And God, I want to thank you for all the blessings, the money ones, the material ones, and the blessings that have nothing to do. The kids, the grandkids, the family members, the health, the beautiful sunrises, the sunsets, the beauty of the world that God gives us. I count all of those blessings, and yes, I am going to be generous. And I'm going to lay up stores in heaven, and I'm going to spend my time not just putting money in my 401k, but I'm going to, by the grace of God, serve Him and put some money in whatever those kinds of accounts are that are in heaven. But in the end, I'm going to trust God for daily bread. And if I happen to have a few loaves of bread in the freezer, I'll be thankful for those too. And if somebody comes over, we'll have peanut butter sandwiches. And we'll share what we've got. And before we eat, we'll thank God for the good things He's given. Let's stand and let's sing. If you need to respond, we invite you to do that. But most of all, the response is, what do I do with my wallet? What do I do with my paycheck? What do I do with my future? But it all sort of begins with what do I do with my heart and my mind. Let's sing together.